Hello and welcome to another tutorial. So in this tutorial we're going to be building a comment system with MPTT, the modified pre-order tree traversal technique. So a little bit about MPTT. MPTT is a technique for storing hierarchical data in the database. So it isn't a Django feature, it is an individual technology which we can implement within our Django application. The aim of using MPTT is to make retrieval operations very efficient on hierarchical data that we might have in our application. So where you might want to apply MPTT in your application, so think of nested comments, like I'm going to show you in this tutorial, maybe categories with many subcategories, or anywhere else you have a large amount of hierarchical data. To get MPTT working in our existing blog, we're first going to install MPTT and then apply to the existing comment model. So if you are doing this or building from new, you can follow this tutorial because essentially we are starting from a new comment model, and then we're going to add the comment model to the admin.py file so that we can see it within the admin system. So this process is slightly different from adding any other model to your admin.py file. We're then going to go ahead and edit the form to add the MPTT functionality, and then spend a lot of time on the actual template trying to get all the different functionality working for the actual comment system. And yeah, I guess the template is the front end. So here we're going to add some functionality to make sure that the comment system works at a basic level and has all the basic functionality, so it's at least working and functional. And then as an additional type of task, we add some pagination. So Django comes with this scaffolding for pagination, so it makes it really easy to apply pagination within your system. So far we have been building a blog, a simple blog in Django, and we've added some categories. We've got nice categories, and in the last or the previous tutorial we added some media, these images. And now we're going to move on to comments. So we already had a comment system. So now I've replaced this comment system with this new system here, this hierarchical comment system. You can see that there's different levels of replies. So this system, although it doesn't look very pretty at this point, it has all the functionality that you're going to need. So in addition to including or creating this structure, hierarchical structure of commenting, you can also obviously reply. So I've added some JavaScript so that we can reply to this particular comment, for example. We can close, or we can reply to this comment, etc. So it does automatically close if I then go to reply. So I can reply here instead, or I can reply here, etc. So our system then does also allow us to paginate. So we've got a simple pagination system here, so I can go to page 2. So I'm not using Ajax, so it just happens to flick to the right to the top there, but this is page 2 of my comments and page 1. So this is a little bit of Bootstrap there implemented for that system. And we can also add a new comment to the system. So like I said, this isn't looking amazing at the moment, but it has all the functionality that you're going to need. So if I press F12, in addition to that, I have included or just thought about mobile view. So when you go into mobile view, there is a little bit of indentation, less than what you would see on a desktop view, but it should still also be working in mobile view. Okay, so with that said, this is part 5 of this blog series. So I'm going to start building from where we left off in part 4. Like I said, you can apply this to your new system, or if you've got an individual system that you're building and want to apply MPTT to. But I'm going to start off by downloading part 4. So I've headed across to the Very Academy repository. I'm going to download that and create a new virtual environment. So if you don't want to see that, then just skip ahead to the next section and we'll start building. So for anyone else, let's go ahead now and just download part 4 and get this started so that we can then apply the MPTT 2. So we'll go ahead and just download this. I'm just going to download it as a zip. So you can obviously pull this down if you're familiar with Git. So I've just made a new folder here on my C drive. I've called it MPTT. So I'm just going to extract part 4 into this folder and delete that. And then just go in here. I'm going to cut that, just bring it back onto this root directory here, remove the folder. So here I have all the files from part 4. So I'm going to utilize a virtual environment to start this. So I'll go ahead now and create that. So we're going to do that within the code editor. So I'm just going to control that, open up Visual Studio Code, and then within here I'm just going to open up a new terminal and then change the directory to that. And then I'm going to run the py with the switch M because I'm using software, and type in venv, which is going to start the virtual environment, and I'm going to put it into a folder called venv. So that's going to create the virtual environment folder. And then I just need to go ahead and start that up. So I type in venv /s tab for scripts, and then tab A for activate, press tab, activate appears, and then I activated the virtual environment. So now I'm working within the virtual environment. So in order to get this application working, we're going to need to install all the dependencies that the application needs. So because we're already on part 4 and we've installed some other additional software, for example Pillow, that is needed in the previous tutorial. So we just need to run the requirements file and install all the items that we're going to need to get this application working. So to do that, make sure you're in the right directory, and then we're going to use the pip install -r for requirements file, and then the requirements file, which is called requirements.txt. So that's basically going to take all the items that are in here and just make sure that they're installed so that our application will work. So once that's installed, we can now just go ahead and run the server. So if you're not familiar, we've got the admin system, so /admin. The username and password is admin and admin to enable you to get into there. And you can see that we've got category, comments, and posts. So I've imported the project into Visual Studio Code. I'm going to run a new terminal, just make sure that the virtual environment is turned on. And then the first thing I'm going to need to do is install MPTT. So we'll go ahead and pip install django-mptt. So that then imports that into our project. So I've then moved ahead and gone into my blog, into my models, and because I'm going to be utilizing MPTT, I've imported it in to the project. So MPTT models, we're going to import the MPTT model and tree foreign key. So that's what I'm going to need for this project. So if we go down into our existing comment table here, you can see we've got post, name, email, content, publish, and status. So to apply a MPTT model, or to convert this to MPTT, all I need to do first is tell it that we're going to be utilizing or extending from MPTT, so MPTT model. So that's the first change that I need to make. And secondly, as defined in the MPTT documentation, you must define a parent field, which is a tree foreign key to self. So the tree foreign key that we're going to define is just a regular foreign key that renders form fields differently in, for example, the admin and a few other places. So here I've added the tree foreign key. So I've just called it parent equals tree foreign key self. So I'm making a foreign key within this model, referring to self here. So normally when we make a foreign key, we connect it to a different table or model. So in this case, we want it to be connected to this model. So we include self. So on delete model cascade. So when we delete this instance, it's going to potentially delete any other instance that's connected to this. Null equals true. So this can be a null value. Blank equals true. And related name equals child or children, sorry. So that's going to be utilized when we start thinking about accessing the data or the child data within this model, when we want to print out information to screen. So in addition to that, you see that we haven't changed anything else here. Everything else is exactly the same, so we can keep all this other information. So we are going to change this down here. So we'll keep the return and then the meta information. So we are going to need to define ordering, or we can define ordering. So we do this slightly differently here because we're not using Django in this case. So the class MPTT meta, which is now going to override the existing meta. So we're going to just use, in this case, order insertion by and then publish. So here, all we're going to try and do is order by the publish date. So this basically just indicates the natural ordering of the data in our tree. Before we migrate our new model and commit to our database, let's just go ahead and access the admin.py file and just delete the registration for the existing comment model. So my next step is going to be a little bit of an inconvenience for some, possibly, but I'm basically going to just delete all my migrations and the database and start from fresh and just regenerate the whole database again. Of course, you could save individual data within the different models here and then import that back in, but that's what I'm going to do now. I'm just going to go into my migrations folder here. I'm just going to delete everything from the initial to 004 where we got up to. I'm just going to delete that first. So that's all my migrations deleted, and then I'm going to go ahead and delete the actual database. So I'm just starting from fresh, and now I can go ahead and make my migrations. So I'll go ahead and py manage py and then make migrations. So that's going to create a nice fresh database and initial migration, and then I can run the migrate. There we go. So everything is working perfectly. So there are a few different complications, and we could have integrated the data into our existing model, but that is simply the cleanest and easiest way of performing this action on this beginner's tutorial. So we have deleted the database. Let's go back into my command or my terminal. I'm just going to run py, and then I'm going to create a super user again. So this is just admin and admin, username and password. So when I start this server again, go back into my browser, I should now be able to use admin, and you can see that I've got my categories, and I've got my posts. So obviously there's nothing in there, so I'm just going to go ahead and add a category, Django, and then I'll go ahead also and just create a new post. So I'll put it into the category Django, new Django post, and then I'll just use this for that. I'll give it an author and just make sure it's published, press save. So now I've got that in place, let's register the comments model. So to do that, two things. First of all, we're going to import MPTT. We're going to import the MPTTModelAdmin. And then once we've done that, we go ahead at the bottom here, we're going to use admin site register. So we're going to just extend from models. So we're importing all the models. We want to use the comment model, and we're going to then apply the MPTTModelAdmin. So that's going to allow us to access the model within our admin area. Notice that it will then appear, but then when we go into it, it says template does not exist. So the reason why that is because we forgot, or we haven't included MPTT yet in our application. So what we need to do is just go into the My Sites folder, the main directory folder for this project or this application, go into settings, and then just make sure that we import MPTT in our defined applications. There we go. So now when we go back and refresh, everything is now working perfectly, and we can add a new comment and so on. So at this point, we actually have a model that's using MPTT. We can actually just add some data here. So there's no parent here because we only have one post. So we don't have any comments yet. Sorry. So we can just use a name an email, and we can build a simple comment. So press save. So you can now see I've got a comment. So now I can go back in and add a new comment, and this time I can add a parent comment. So I want this to be a reply to this comment. So I'll just add some data here. So you can now see if I press save, this is indented, suggesting this is a hierarchical piece of data, which is connected to this first comment here. Obviously, for our comment system, this just denotes the fact this is a comment that's replying to this initial comment. So we can add multiple layers here. So if I add a new comment here, and I can comment the comment and so on. So there are multiple layers that we can add. Okay, so that was the easy bit. Now we need to actually apply this on our template. So if you go ahead and open up your website at this point, you'll notice that the comments do exist and they are working on the existing code. So what we need to do now is just adapt the code so that we can utilize MPTT and create this hierarchical structure. I think that's the first process. In our existing application inside the blog, we have a template and we have the single page. So this is where comments are currently being served. So notice here we have this section here, this width, where we just count the comments and we just output how many comments there are. So that was the first section right there. And then in the second section here we have this loop. So we basically just loop out all the comments. So if there aren't any comments, we're just saying there are no comments, the empty. And then once we finish that, at the bottom here is our form, our existing form, where we build a new comment. So let's first of all output the comments from our system. We're going to be utilizing MPTT tags here to do this. So MPTT comes with a range of different tags that we can utilize within our template. And to access them, we first of all need to load MPTT tags. So I'm going to build this inside a new element. And inside of here, I'm going to set out or create a loop. So I don't need to use a for loop anymore. I can utilize an MPTT tag to do that automatically for me. So I use recurse tree. And then I pass in the comments. So if you remember from the view, I'm passing all the comments via comments. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm setting up a loop here to loop through all the comments and output the comments. So I will need to end this. So I'll just put that in place right now. So that's essentially what I'm doing here is I'm building this loop, existing loop, which outputs all the comments, but utilizing MPTT tags. So the data goes into this loop as comments, but we refer to it as node. So in this case, inside of my comments, I've obviously got content in my comments. So I want to extract that. So I utilize node, and within node, I'm going to extract out the content. So let's just see what that looks like. So when I go back to my template, you can see now what it's applied is this AAAA. So that was the first comment. Notice it's not outputting the child comment. So this is what our new loop is outputting, just the root comments. So it is working. So let's just go back into the code. What we're going to do now is just remove this for. So we're going to get rid of that. We don't need this loop anymore because we're going to be utilizing these MPTT tags to loop out the content from the comments. So now when I go back into my template, you can see it just says AAAA. Okay, so now to output the child nodes. So what I need to do is create an if statement here. And I'm just basically going to check to see if the node is a root node or not. So if it's not a root node, therefore it then is a child node. So it's then going to output the child. So I create a simple div here, and I've just added some bootstrap classes and a children class, which we're going to edit later. And I'm just going to output any of the children. So here, children is just referring to any comments that are related to the main node here. So as this loops through, it's going to loop out the main comment here, and then it's going to check to see if it has any connected comments. If it does, it's then going to output the child. So let's go back into the post here and refresh, and you can now see it's outputting the BBBB, which we know by going into the admin here, or what we did earlier is we created this child comment from the main comment here. So that's what we're outputting there. So you can start to see that we've got some functionality here. So there's a range of different data that we can access. Let's just go into here and type in node level. So we can actually see the level. So this should be level 0 and this should be level 1. If I refresh, you can see that that's the case. And that's just giving you an indication in the background of what's happening here, because all the child elements will be level 1. So if I were to make a new comment here, so if I go back into admin, create a new comment, I'm just going to make a comment on the comment, and then I'm going to call this C. So if I save that, I now have a comment on the comment, so a new level. So if I go back into my post here, it should now automatically add this child. So it's going to loop again. So the loop, now you can see what's happening, is going to loop for the root node. Then it's going to loop to see if there's any children. And then there'll be another loop to check to see if there's any children connected to that. And then it's going to output it here. And you can see the levels 0, 1, and 2. So I apologize for anyone who's not following this series and is wondering how on earth I got that data to appear, having not shown you any views. So this is just the existing view that we created in the previous tutorial, which you can by all means go and have a look at that tutorial in this series, creating a simple comments form. So here, just to quickly go over this, so we established, or we collected all the data about the post. This is for the individual page, and then we collected all the comments that were associated to that post, and then we can output that. So we're just outputting the data here. So when we want to create a new piece of information, we're basically just utilizing this logic here to do that. So we're posting the data to this function here, and then we're just organizing this data and saving it to the database. So what we need to do now is make some changes here because we're utilizing MPTT. Excellent. So there we have it. So there are the changes that we needed to make. So we didn't need to make any changes at all here in this section. And I'm going to introduce a little hack that's going to circumnavigate having to make any changes there. So let's go ahead now and go into the form and let's see what we need to do here. So we're now going to be utilizing MPTT forms to complete this. So we're going to make some changes here in order for us to utilize that. Just to quickly refresh for anyone new to forms here. So basically here what we're doing, we're creating a new class here, and this is going to generate or create a form that we're going to use. So essentially this code here is creating the form. So this is the model that we're using to build our form from, the comment model. And we're utilizing the fields name, email, and content at the moment. So that's what the user has to enter to create a comment. These widgets here, these are for creating additional, in this case, styling to our form, so we can control what our form looks like. So because our form is being created via this code, we can't then go in and easily style it. So we have to use these widgets here to create some style. And you notice here that I'm adding some classes which are connected to Bootstrap. So these are Bootstrap classes here that are changing the style of my form. So let's go ahead and now just add the MPTT forms. So that's what we're going to include. We're going to import the tree node choice field. So with that in mind, what we're going to do is we're just going to collect all the information. So we're going to parent equals tree node choice field. So we're going to create a tree node choice field. So like I said, this is going to look at or feel a little bit hacky to implement this, but I'm just trying to give you some more information that you might want to utilize in different instances, at the same time create this comment facility. So a tree node choice field. So what we're going to do here, you're going to see in a minute, is we're going to make a choice field which we can select from. So that's going to make it easier for you to understand how this is working. So we connect that to parent. So if you remember in our model, parent was our foreign key right here. So we're now going to just add this in. So name, we also want now parent. So essentially what's happening here now in our form is that we want to enter the name. We want to enter if there is a parent comment that we want to connect it to, and then the email and the content. So if I save that now and then go back into my form, what we should now have in our form, oh, there seems to be an error. I think I just need to restart the server. Nope. Parent email, have I done something wrong? Okay, I missed the comma. So that should be working now. Apologies. Okay, so now what we have here is this drop down box. So if you consult the MPTT documentation, there's a few different options here, but I'm creating a drop down. So essentially what I'm doing now, let's apply this. So what I want to do now is make a comment to CCC. So I'm just going to add DDD. I'm going to make a comment to that one, and then my email, and I press the comment that I want. I press submit, and you can now see that I've made a comment to CCC, and I've added a new layer as well, layer 3. So you can see here that we're adding slowly the functionality that we need. So if I, for example, I add EEE and I don't add a parent, the problem we've got here is that parent by default is set to required. So it's not actually going to allow us to add a new item. It says, please select an item. So if I right click, if you don't understand what I'm saying there, if I right click and just go into that, you can see here that it says required. So this is just a HTML attribute that forces you to add something to that to submit the form. So we can remove that very easily. So let's go ahead and do that. So I just wanted to show you different ways of managing form fields. And this is directly from the Django documentation, using the documentation version 3, the current version. So previously we created some widgets here, and that manipulated or added some attributes to our form. So that's not the only way that we can manipulate. So we want to remove, if you remember, we want to remove the required. So if I just go back into my page, we want to add remove the requiredness from here. So this said required in the select. So we know this is a select here, and the name is parent. So we've got that information. So let's just remove that. So I'm just going to go ahead here, and before the class, I'll just add a new function here. It's a bit crazy. I'm just following the manual. And what we can do is add a self field. So self field, we know the fields was a parent. Okay, so that was the hook there, and required equals false. So with that in place now, if I just go back and refresh the page, right click here and inspect, you can now see that's been removed. So I can now, in actual fact, build a new comment. So this is obviously going to be level 0. So we got to E. So we don't need to select anything there. And we E at e.com. And then 1, 2, 3, 4. And there we go. So now we have a new comment. So if you remember back in the preview I gave you, there was a comment form at the bottom. That was just purely for making new comments. So if I'm going to make a new comment, I'm not going to need this box here. Because again, if you remember in the preview I gave you, there was a reply button for each section here, so we could reply to that particular comment. So let's first of all remove this section here, and we'll just utilize this as the new comment. So again, the reason why I set this up here, because I just wanted to show that we could remove these items. So we want to remove the label first, so from the parent. So the label was this label here. So if I inspect, you can see that this is going to be the label. We'll refer to it as parent. Notice that it's connected with the for. So I'm accessing it via parent. So if I go back to my code, I've removed that. And then what I'm also going to do is just actually remove the select option. So I use self fields and then refer to parent again, and I'm going to update it. So I'm going to add a class called dnone. So this is a bootstrap class where I basically remove the element from view using the dnone class. So that's not going to show on the page. So now if I just refresh the page, I now have a perfectly good comment form where I can create new comments in my system. So I'll just reiterate again, this is not necessarily the way that you have to do it or should do it. I simply just wanted to show you some additional features and get you familiar with editing the form as I've shown you. Okay, so next up we need to create some sort of functionality so that we can press reply for these comments and make a new comment to a comment. Okay, so now we're going to build a button so that we can click on the reply button and reply to the comment. So go ahead and go into the single, and then in here I think what we need to do is add a button. So we'll add a button. Let's just add a, like I showed you in the preview, a line, and then we're just going to add a button. So notice that what's going to happen here is that when we click a button, it's going to open a function called myFunction, and it's going to pass in to that function the node ID. So I'll explain that in a second, but let's just have a look what this looks like. Okay, so now we have a reply button. So you can remove this code if you want to. I've just got this there just for show for now. So what I can do now is press reply, and that's going to then open up the new comment form so I can make a reply to this specific comment. So let's think about this logically. I'm going to click reply, and that's going to open up a new form where I can type in my name, my email, and the content again. But I want to match my new comment to the existing comment. So I need to know the identification of the comment that I want to make a reply to. So if we go back into the code here, we've got this ID. So let's just show the ID. So if I were to print out here the ID, like we did the level, and go back, you can now see that each comment has an ID, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. So when I press reply to any of these comments, I'm gonna use the identifier as a way of identifying where my comment should be replied to. So if there isn't an ID, like for example down here, then it's just going to make a new comment. But if there is an ID, then it's going to match the comment and then place it underneath where it needs to go. So that's important. So let's go back into here. So you can see now I'm going to create a new function, and I'm going to pass in the ID to that function so that when it makes the comment, it's going to connect it to that particular comment that I want to make a reply to. So let's go ahead now and create a new function. So I created this new function here at the bottom of my page. Function's called myFunction. So that just makes the connection to this on-click myFunction right up here in the button. So what I want to do here is that when someone clicks on this button, a new comment form opens so that I can type in all my details. So we're going to be utilizing vanilla JavaScript here. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to first of all collect the element by ID. So we're going to take in the ID of the comment that we want to reply to, and we're going to utilize that to get the element by ID. So let's just go back up here in our in our code, what we need to do is when we output the content, we want to also add a new class with the node ID. So let's just go ahead and put it right here. So the ID is going to be the node ID. So that's going to be a unique identifier that we can utilize. So what's going to happen is that I'm going to get that element, and then once I've got the element, we'll simply then insert adjacent HTML at the end. So after the end, sorry. And at the moment, we're just going to say hi. So we're just going to inject this into our code. So let's go ahead and do that. So if I refresh, press reply, notice it says hi right there. So that's how we're going to inject some HTML. So obviously we don't want to inject hi, we want to inject some HTML. So let's go ahead and create a form. So I've decided to create the form manually. So you can see here that I've got this form and I'm using multi-line, so I'm using the backslash just to break it up so you can see what's going on here. So I've created the form, and in this form I've added all the labels and inputs that I would need. So where I got this code from originally was what I've done at the bottom here is I've just taken a look of this, and I've basically, if I remove that, I've taken this code and I've looked for the form and I've just copied that. So I've right clicked and I've copied that element, and that's enabled me to create a simple template. So in addition, what I've done is I've pre-populated the select option. So remember the select option drop down that we utilize? Well, I pre-populated it with the ID, because remember when we click on the reply, that's going to also send to the function the ID of the comment. So that way, when it's pre-populated here in the option, when I submit, I know that that comment's going to then be applied to that particular comment that I'm replying to via the ID. So that's how this is everything's going to be connected here. So notice I also changed the ID here because I don't want to have the same ID as the original form. So I've changed that slightly. But everything else here is pretty much exactly the same. I've taken out some of the code that I don't need in the options because I'm not actually selecting from the drop down. So with that in place now, if I go back to my code and just refresh, you can see that when I press reply, that's going to create a new reply box here. And I know in the background, that's going to be automatically connected to this ID for this comment. So when I do reply, it should appear there. So it should be working now. So let's go ahead and reply to, for example, EEE. So I type FFF, press submit, and you can now see I've made a reply to E, and it's nicely indented there so I can see that it's a child comment. Okay, so everything is working okay at this point, but notice that we need to add some things now, because if I press reply and then reply again, it just continuously makes new forms. So I need to sort that out first. So that can be easily sorted with a simple if statement. So let's just close that. So before I create the form, I'm just going to run an if statement. So here, document contains document get element by ID new form. So notice that when I create the form, I'm giving it the ID of new form. So I'm going to check to see on my page if I've got that form. So I'm getting it by ID. And then if I do find that it is has been opened, then I'm going to basically just use the remove to remove this element by ID, which is new form. So that runs first to check to see if the form is available. So with that in place, if I go back and refresh, press reply. So if I press reply now here, for example, it's going to remove this and then add a new one here. Okay, and there we go. So next up, you can see that I've got some indentation here. For the reply boxes, particularly this one, for example, it gets really thin. So I don't really want that. So I want to stretch that all the way across. So let's just apply that now. So what I've done here, just to show you, we can put this in the actual style sheet, but I've just placed it here for now. So within our single page, after the block, I've added some style. So what's happening here is that when we create, or when there is a child element, this gets wrapped up in a child div, and a child element. So if I inspect, you can see here that we've got the div class child. So what's happening here is when we have a second child, so for example this one here, it then gets wrapped up in another class called children. So we can utilize that to style this. So I want to get this class here called children to move across. So if I go back into my code, I've added some style here, so children and then the form. So I'm applying it to the style to the children form, and margin left and then 48 pixels. So by default there's I think a 48 pixel indentation. So if I refresh and then just click on reply to the first child, you can see that now it's in line. So probably what I didn't explain before, just going back into my code, let's just see this. You can see here that I've got a padding left of 2 for the child. So for every child comment, it adds another padding left of 2. So this is just a bootstrap padding. And notice that when you get up to the medium, it adds a padding left of 5. So this one here is for mobile phones, and this is for desktop views. So I've got a padding of 5. So a padding of 5 in Bootstrap is 48 pixels. And this is why I'm using -48 to get it lined up. So go back into my code here. You'll notice that when I go to the next level down, so level number 2, it doesn't work because I'm only moving it across by 48. So a simple kind of hack here is that we can just add a new style and just go one more depth. So children and then dot children form. So by doing this, we're just going to the next level. So instead of 48, then it's going to be 96. So if we apply that now to the second level, to refresh, so this is the first level, and that sits nicely on the left hand side here in full width. So this one should do the same now. So this one should do the same now. And there we go. So level 2, it is now doing that. So level 3 here obviously is going to be missing 48 and so on. So you can just keep applying that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to limit my comments to, I think, 2 children. So I'm going to limit the indentation or the amount of times I can reply to a level of 2. So how do I limit the amount of levels I can have? Because this could go on endlessly. We could have 100 levels here, and the problem is obviously that this will get smaller and smaller, the indentation, and it'll start to look silly. So we need to control this. So in order to control the levels, in this case, if we go back into the code, what we need to do is when we get to a certain level, we want to basically prevent there being a button where you can reply. So that's how we're going to control, in this case, how many levels that we're going to have. So this is going to be a simple if statement. So we can access the levels, remember, by level. So all we need to do is test the level. So if node level is less than 3, so we're going to just use level 1 and 2, then it's going to show the button. So we can just end that if statement, and there we go. So simply, in this case, if the level is below 3, we're going to show a button, you can reply to it. If else, there's not going to be a button. So that's how we're going to limit the amount of levels. So you can see here now that level 3 doesn't have a reply button, so we cannot reply. So that way now we have the reply boxes working nicely and they're lined up. So I'm just going to go ahead and tidy this up a little bit. So what I want to do is add a wrapper, a div wrapper around. So in this case, I'm just going to remove this ID from here. So that's just the content. I'm going to wrap this in a div. So I want to end this div after the end if. So that should add a wrapper around my comments. It just makes it a little bit clearer to see. Obviously you can change the styling as you wish. Okay, so that just makes it a little bit clearer. So now let's just add in some additional content. So in the preview I gave you the, we had I think a title or the username, and then on the right hand side here we had the date in which it was created. So we can do that easily. So let's go ahead and just add this functionality. So here I'm using deflex from Bootstrap. I'm justifying the content between. So the first element here, by, that's going to be on the left hand side, and then the second element is then going to be on the other side. So divs and a div. So the first element is here. It's a little bit confusing because that should be in there. Okay, so with that in place, let's just refresh. So you can now see I've got the by, whoever it's by, the comment, and then the date of which the comment was created. So next up, we're just going to add a button. So when we press reply, on the right hand side here, we're just going to have a button so that we can close the comments form. So we can do that by going into the code. We're going to need to add on the right hand side of this reply. So we're going to use the same format here as we did just then to create something on the left and right hand side. So here I'm just going to utilize Bootstrap again. So here I've created a class, a deflex, justified content between. And so I've then got reply on one side and then the button on the other side. So this button here has an on-click function to a function called form exit, which is basically just going to remove the form element from the page. So I've gone ahead and created a new function. It's called form exit, so it matches up. And then all I'm doing here is document get element by ID, new form, and then we're just going to remove it. So if I press save there and then refresh, you can now see when I press reply, I've got this button here, and I just press close and it disappears. So obviously at this point you can start styling it however you want, however you wish. And you probably don't want the ID and level now, so you can remove that. There we go. So there we go. So we have a reply system in place now, and we have the comment systems, which is limited by 3 levels. So this level here not having the reply button. So that just obviously controls our styling slightly. So this should now also be suitable for mobile use. So yeah, it looks okay. Obviously you can change the formatting here however you wish. Talking about mobile, probably one obvious thing that needs to be corrected is the fact that we've still got this margin problem here. When we go into mobile and press some of these deeper comments, you can see that we're still using that margin and it's going way over than we want. So that can be easily solved by going into your styling and just reconfiguring this styling. So for example, you could use an app media here, so min width of 600. So when it's in the mobile view, the margin left is not 48 or 96, it's just going to be 0 pixels. So again, when we're going back into the mobile, you can see that things are nicer to look at and they are kind of lined up. Obviously you can manipulate this as you wish. Okay, so I've gone ahead and added some more comments because now we're going to have a look at pagination. So eventually this comments list might be too large, you want to paginate it. So therefore we create a simple pagination system now so that we can only show a certain amount of posts on one page. So in order to get this pagination working, we're going to just need to manipulate or change the views file. So here we want to simply just start to define how many items we want to display per page. So this is going to be straight from the Django manual. Let's first of all just import the tools that potentially we're going to need, or some of the important tools that you might utilize. So from the core, Django core, we're going to use the paginator. So here we're going to add all the scaffolding to easily create a pagination system. So again, check out the documentation to understand what some of these imports are. So we can now go ahead and start to think about utilizing pagination. So let's make a few changes to our view. So first of all, we're going to get remove comments equals post comments and change this to all comments. So that's going to collect all the comments for the particular post. And then we set up a variable here called page, which essentially shows the first page, the request get page 1. And then we've got the paginator here. So this is defining how many items we want to show on each page. So we want to divide the all comments by 3. So we're going to show 3 items per page. So next up quickly then we're going to try this. So we're going to try and get the comments and create the pagination. So we're going to paginate 3 or divide our pages into 3 items. And then also we're going to then set up the get information. So we're going to try that. So except when, for example, the page is not an integer. So for example, if we changed in the URL of the page to a name, then we won't have then a page as an integer. So we want to capture that. And then if we do capture that, what we're going to do is just set the pagination to the default page 1. So we'll see that in action. And then if we've got an empty page here, you can see that we've got comments paginator page and then paginator.number of pages. So if you check out the manual, you'll see all of these different functions. So the empty page here is raised when the page is given a valid value, but no object exists on that page. So for example, if there are only 2 pages and we typed in 10, then there would be an error. So we need to kind of capture that. So to summarize, here we're dealing with the pagination system. If there's an error, for example, someone types in the name instead of a number for the pagination page. And here we're basically trying to capture if someone types in page 20 and we've only got 2 pages, for example. So that sets up our pagination system. So let's go back into our website and refresh. You can now see I've got 3 items on the page. So what I need to do now is just head to the front end, and I need to add some pagination options here so I can go from one page to the next. If I were, for example, to add in the URL, what I can do is manually just, at the moment, page number 1, page number 2, and so on. But notice what you're going to have is this error here called not in depth first order. So the problem here is that, for example, there is a reply to this, and what's happening is that it's not being shown here, it's being shown on the next page, but then it puts everything not in order. And essentially that's where the problem is. So this is simply just for show. So if I change this, for example, to 6, show 6, and go to page 2, you can see that it's working because this comment here is a child comment. It's not going to be on the next page. And we've got a new comment here and it's working okay. So this is the problem you're going to have with pagination, but I thought it'd be good to show you how to create simple pagination. We might not be able to apply it directly here. We'd need to make some changes. So we would need to test to see if, for example, the last item in our list was a child item. If it was a child item, we need to check to see if the first item in the next list is a child item. If it is, then obviously we need to show it in the previous page. So that's how we can manually at the moment change pages. But let's go ahead and now just create this simple button here, or this simple navigation option, so we can navigate to separate pages. So head back into the code and go over to the single HTML page, and you can see here that I've gone ahead and pre-coded this. So here we're using Bootstrap. So I've created a new div. This is underneath the end of my element where the M recursive tree ends. So I've created a nav here, and inside of this we have an if. So if comments have other pages, so first of all, we're going to check to see if there are multiple pages. So comments dot has other pages. So that's going to check to see if we have other pages. So if there isn't any other pages, then there's no point showing this pagination navigation bar, is there? So that's the first check we make. So you can see here that basically, first of all, if comments have previous. So where do all these functions come from? Has previous, has other pages, etc. Well, if you head over again to the documentation, go to the paginator. Inside of this paginator class, you're going to find lots of different attributes and methods. So these are the methods that we're currently using here. So page has previous, has other pages, and so on. So we're just utilizing the built-in functionality from Django to create this pagination navigation. So has previous. If it does have previous, then we're going to show the previous page number, and so on. So for number in comments, paginator page range. So here we're going to set out the page range, and that's a for loop. So obviously with this here, we're going to set out the amount of numbers that we're going to have in our pagination, and then has next. So if there is a next item, then we're going to show the next text. If it doesn't, notice that we're using disabled, and we're just going to disable the next text. So going back here in our item, so this has been disabled here, but you can still see it because there isn't a next page. I'm on page 2. So if I go back to page 1, you can see that the previous has been disabled. So that creates a simple navigation bar. So utilize the Django documentation to breeze through that piece of code, but it's just a simple case of utilizing the facilities that are already embedded into Django to create this simple navigation. You will notice that the comment section is now broken. It doesn't show the numbers. That's because what we've done is we've changed, if we go back into the view, we've changed the variable here from comments to all comments. So we aren't able to count what's being returned. So all we need to do is just add that to what's being returned to our template. So all comments, and then go back into our single in our template here, and just where we output the amount of comments, we want to with comments.count total comments. So here we're just going to say all comments.count, save that. So when we go back in and refresh, we now have the comments count. And there we go. So that's just about it for this tutorial. We now have created a comments system with MPTT. Hopefully this gives you a little bit of an insight into how to utilize MPTT in your models and to output data onto your templates.